In this episode of the podcast, I feature an interview with the Lenape of Pennsylvania. You'll learn the history of the Lenape here, as well as the prophecy of the Four Crows and what the future holds. I got a thrill to learn how to integrate the Lenape history with my own family history here in Pennsylvania, and I hope it helps you too. Be sure to check out all the links in the show notes so you can connect with them, and let's get on with the show. I am thrilled to have on the podcast today Adam Waterbearer DePaul, who is the Chief of Education and Head Storykeeper. Did I get that right?
Tribal Storykeeper. Tribal
Storykeeper of the Lenape of Pennsylvania. And I just am, it's just such a thrill to finally feel like I'm filling in a piece of like my own ancestors' past history and Pennsylvania history talking to you. So welcome to the podcast, Adam.
One issue. Thank you for having me.
I want to start with this little snippet of history that I found in the Sidney George Fisher book. He makes this reference to William Penn setting aside a piece of land at 2nd and Market Street in Philadelphia. And anyone listening who's been in Philadelphia knows that area is very developed now. But he set aside a land for the 6 tribes to meet and hold council. And I thought, it would have been really cool if we had kept that promise to the people that were here to keep that piece of land, because how cool would it be to have the intersection of cultures today? But that promise was broken of keeping that little piece of land there for that one function. But, and a lot of things fell apart after William Penn's arrival and some treaties. So I'm hoping we could start with that piece of history. So because as a descendant of Europeans, I have a very limited knowledge of Native history, like indigenous history to Pennsylvania. So let's start there. Fill us in on what happened. How did we get, and it's a lot of history, so take your time to cover as much as you want. You can give us the short version, the longer version. This is your time.
Okay. And yeah, that's a very good question. And, many people have heard that we had a good relationship with William Penn. And they do ask about that, and it's good that they do. We know now, probably more than ever before, that we have to investigate stories that might sound a little over-romanticized or glossed. But this is one thing that is true. We did have a very good relationship with William Penn. Now, I always have to take the time to say William Penn was not perfect. And if we examine him, and especially if we examine him through a contemporary lens in hindsight, we can find much to criticize. And that has to be said. However, for his time and in his time, in comparison to other colonial leaders of the time, he really did go way above and beyond in trying to establish friendly and respectful relationships with our people. We still honor Penn, our relationship with Penn, in a treaty and a journey we do every 4 years, and have done since 2002. So where the relationship turned drastically and violently south was with Penn's sons. Penn's sons, this is the era that ushered in the walking purchase. Would you like me to say a word on that?
Yeah, why don't you? I think it is sort of the one thing people point to, I think, now as like, this was bad.
Yeah.
So it was, yeah. So please describe it.
Sure. And I'll keep it short. But basically, we had agreed to give Penn's sons some land out of respect for their father, to allow them to live among us as neighbors. And we had agreed that to decide this amount of land, we would gather at the Delaware River, and we would walk in a northwesterly direction for a day and a half. And in this time, we could walk, we could talk together, we could discuss what our relationship would look like in the future. And then, however far we got in that day and a half, we would draw a plot on the map and draw a line back to the Delaware River. And that triangle, with the river being the eastern border, would be how much land we'd give Penn's sons. So between making this agreement and the day of the walk, they orchestrated a number of things. The first thing they did is they hired contractors to come in and clear swaths of land as far as the eye could see, in, of course, what was still this great northeastern wilderness. So chop down trees, brush, vines, and just make straight, cleared paths. And then they hired 3 professional runners to come take place in this event. So when we gathered on the day and we prepared to start walking, these runners took off running down these cleared track lanes, really like Olympic track lanes, you can consider them. And our people, walked for a little bit, trying to kind of comprehend what was going on until they realized that nobody was going to be walking with them, and just kind of sauntered off the path. But these runners kept running. Now, 2 of them could not run for the whole day and a half. They had to stop out of exhaustion on the way. But one of them did continue running that entire day and a half. So that was where they drew the line, where that person stopped running. And then, as a final bit of manipulation, if you want to call it that, when they drew that line back to the Delaware River, they literally tilted the map slightly to make that angle a bit more obtuse than it would have been otherwise. But a little tilt goes a long way when you're working with that kind of scale. So at the end of the walking event, when we thought we were giving a good couple acres to them so they could live with us and raise a family settlement, we ended up losing an amount of land in Pennsylvania about equal to the area of Rhode Island state. And then this is just one example. It's become one of the most famous because the story is interesting. But it's just one example of many different underhanded land deals and treaty deals that happened between us and Penn's sons and their era of colonists. And once they were able to secure on paper that they had won or purchased, or however else that they had obtained our land, they had no quarter, no reserve in how they removed us. At our cultural center, which is in Easton, Pennsylvania, we have a wall-sized blown-up facsimile of a 1700s Pennsylvania Gazette, where John Penn, Penn's son, on the front page, first column, publicizes the prices that he will pay his colonists if they bring in either Lenape scalps or live Lenape people to be brought into slavery. And he breaks these prices down by age and gender, how much he'll pay for a Lenape man over 10, a woman over 10, and a Lenape male child under 10 years old, and a female child under 10 years old. So it's a very short time, but a very clear, absolute, immediate departure between the good intentions of William Penn and just the terrorizing period of his sons.
That's just dark. I mean, that's the stuff of nightmares. And it was at that point that the Lenape went to the western part of Pennsylvania and then beyond its borders, or what?
Well, this
what
is the
happened
time
then?
when the Lenape people get fractured, as a cohesive nation.
Okay.
So many of our people do go into the diaspora. They're forcibly removed, or they begin to flee, seeing what is coming. Other of our people are able to remain here in a number of ways. But to first focus on the diaspora, on those who were forcibly removed, they spread out in every direction, wherever they could go to feel safe from the impending colonialism. So west, north, south, and they might get out, say, as far as western Pennsylvania, or lower New England, and look around and feel safe and begin to settle, begin to reestablish their community. And then, of course, in a couple months or a year, colonialism would catch up with them. They'd be uprooted and chased farther. So this story of the diaspora, it is just a long, tumultuous process of continuous upheaval, partial resettlement, and then re-upheaval, and this goes in all directions. So today, as a result, there are Lenape people, of course, all over the country, all over the continent, and I'm sure beyond. Um, but what we do have today are 5 Lenape nations that represent this diaspora. People that finally were able to settle and were offered deals by the government where they would, to some extent, be left alone. And these are our diaspora nations. We have 2 in Oklahoma and 1 in Wisconsin. And those are the 3 federally recognized tribes of the Lenape people in the United States. And then other of our people were chased just above what is now the United States border into Canada. And in Ontario, we have 2 more Lenape nations that are recognized by the Canadian government. So that is, again, very cliff notes, not doing any justice to the tumultuous travels they had. But that's very briefly what happened with our diaspora. Now, other Lenape people remained here in our homeland, which, just in case anyone out there is unaware, I should say that our ancestral homeland is western Pennsylvania, southern New York, all of New Jersey, and northern Delaware. That's the Lenapehoking, where the Lenape come from. And there are a number of ways our people could stay. Some small groups tried to go into hiding, again, in this great wilderness. Many of our people were chased down for those bounties and brought into indentured servitude and remained here that way. But the primary way that we stayed here was between marriages through colonial men and Lenape women. So by all those ways, some Lenape people were able to stay here. Now they suffered their own terrible trials and challenges here. It wasn't okay to be Lenape in the colonies. If you stayed here, you completely got off the public radar as an indigenous person, as a Lenape. You acted like a colonist, you identified as a colonist, even down to things like census data and birth and death records, if we were allowed to have them. Often we weren't. But this is the lineage of my nation, the Lenape Nation of Pennsylvania. We are indebted to our ancestors who remained here under forced assimilation and hiding for hundreds of years and passed their ways down in secret through the oral tradition to their children and grandchildren, so that we could keep Lenape culture alive here in the homeland. And my nation isn't the only. Right over the river in New Jersey. In North Jersey, you have the Ramapo Mountain Lenape, and in South Jersey, you have the Nanticoke Lenni Lenape Nation. And then in Delaware State, you have the Delaware tribe of Lenape Indians. So our 4 nations, in addition to, of course, many other individuals all throughout the Lenapehoking, we represent that lineage of the Lenape who remained here.
So the oral traditions, I'm assuming a lot of that's getting written down now. I know you're doing a ton of presentations to share as much as possible and put a face with the name. But I'm hoping more and more is getting written. Or is it a problem? You shared in a presentation the other week that, not that it's a problem, but it's not, that stories need to be alive. So the concept of writing something and making it rigid and fixed it doesn't work for it doesn't work for you. So is that the case?
Raises many problems, and I straddle this subject both as my cultural role of Storykeeper and also as my passion as an academic mythologist. I am very passionate on this subject. It's a difficult area to navigate. We have to write these things down. We have to have records, and I would never say don't do that. A large part of my dissertation work and my own research is making records of our stories and things like that. But it's so important, what is important, or I should say what the bottom line is, not whether we're telling the stories orally or writing them down. It's how we treat those stories when we encounter them. That's the problem. And the problem is that when people encounter a written story, we have habits, especially throughout academia. And again, I'm an academic. I'm not absolving myself from this. But we have a habit of looking to written documents as the authoritative source. So when people hear stories told, they might enjoy it. They think that's a great story. But then a very possible next step is, let me jump online and find the real story. I'd like to hear, the real thing, or not even hear. I'd like to read the real thing. And in that way, when we create these artifacts, these written artifacts, it causes a number of problems. First of all, they erase future storytellers because they are, future storytellers who go on and tell these stories are now compared to this artifact that you can find on the internet, which is considered the authority for some reason. And really the primary reason seems to be because it's written and we ascribe some kind of authority to that. Another problem, and this is a little more in my dorky academic side, but another problem with writing our stories is that these stories have been told through the oral tradition, from person to person or person to community, since time immemorial, tens of thousands of years. And stories grow and evolve and pass through storytellers and carry those storytellers and their communities with them throughout time. And in that way, the stories stay relevant to the people in the world they're living in. And when we create these artifacts, it freezes just one snapshot of the life of that story. But and again, that in and of itself is okay. It's good. We need historical records. But the problem again is, how do we treat and how do we think of that snapshot? People tend not to look at them in that way, that this is just one flash in the life of the story and an old one. People look at that and say, well, this is the story. And if I hear anything different, it must be a variation or some kind of perversion of that story. And we get stuck with an image of stories that gets frozen in time and doesn't evolve with the community. And if that becomes the authority, especially within the community, then people suffer a kind of dissynchronicity. They get a disharmony with the stories that they hear and the world that they see around them.
Oh, that's just that is just perfect. In so many ways, it really resonates for me. That's why it's perfect. Because it matches what I discovered with family history. There's so much that when you start studying original documents, you get this disconnection between what you learned in school and what you're seeing on documents. And then you try to figure it out, and there's some things written down or maybe nothing written down, and you're just left with these gaping holes trying to figure out like what happened. And realizing that I learned an artifact, I learned an interpretation of history that people have tried to make rigid or firm, and it's not necessarily, it's a history. It's not the history, is kind of what I try to think about. One of the things that has been great is this idea of preserving some of the artifacts of the history of the Lenape. Was your website links to it, and I'll include a link in the show notes. The Fulfilling a Prophecy exhibition that was done in conjunction with the University of Pennsylvania quite a while ago now, but luckily there's a digital version we can look at from anywhere, which is nice for people that want to know. They can learn, get a little taste of it. Could you say a little bit about that prophecy? And I mean, I read it, and of course I read it in my context, not your context. And I was like, oh, is the second crow talking about today's times when there's like a disease that's like, disturbing people, wiping people out? And then I read more. It's like, no, the Lenape feel like it's the fourth crow's time, and they're looking for a restoration of friendship. And I thought, oh, that's nice. And then I had to think more about what the context was for because your concept of the history of Pennsylvania is different than my concept of the history of Pennsylvania, right? We have different perceptions and concepts, based on our people. So yeah, if you could talk a little bit about that prophecy and what is going on now
certainly
in terms of the living history.
And I do want to mention first that, the website, on our website, we do have a link to the exhibit page. The exhibit we put together with Penn in 2008, and it was originally supposed to be up for a year like any exhibit, but it drew so much interest that it ended up serving 3 terms. It was there for 3 years. But after it finally did leave the Penn Museum, Penn shipped it all to us, and we have it at our cultural center now. So if people can make it out to Easton, you can still come and see the exhibit there. And what the exhibit did was it framed our past and present around our story of the Four Crows. And this story came down to us through several different lines of elders in, of course, different forms. Sometimes it's told as the 4 times of the Lenape or the 4 ages that the Lenape. But the story of the Four Crows is very short, and it goes like this. It is said a fox will be loosed upon the earth. It was also said 4 crows will come. The first crow, he flew the way of harmony with Creator. The second crow, he tried to clean the world, but he became sick and died. The third crow saw what happened to his brother, and he hid. The fourth crow will fly in harmony with Creator again. Caretakers, we will live together on the earth. And what we did with the Penn exhibit was we applied that to our history and to our presence, and the exhibit tells our story according to those 4 crows. So the first crow who flies in harmony with Creator, that is our pre-colonial period, when we were here in harmony with ourselves and our indigenous neighbors. The second crow, who tries to clean the world but becomes sick and dies, that part of our exhibit represents colonial contact, the initial friendly relationships, and then of course the drastic southward turn that we just discussed, and all the terrors that came in that period. Now, the third crow zooms in from all Lenape people because the second crow, like we just talked about, this is the time where the nation gets fractured and the diaspora begins. The third crow zooms in on the homeland Lenape, those who remained here. And the third crow talks about our time of remaining here in the homeland in hiding, and ways in which we passed down our culture under the nose of the colonists and kept that Lenape culture alive here. And the fourth crow, who flies in harmony with Creator again, that we do like to think of ourselves now in the fourth crow. Of course, there's so much more work to do. We're not at all saying everything is harmonious and perfect and everything is wonderful. But we are at least now in a time where it's relatively, compared to the past few centuries, safe to come out, to let people know that we are still here, that many of our people never left and have been keeping the culture alive here. And, people like you and other people who invite us out to tell our story and correct the wrongful narratives that have been told about us, that all the Lenape were killed or driven out of the Lenape-Hoking. And what I like to bring up about the fourth crow is that if you read the story in a certain way, it can seem circular because you begin with harmony and you end with harmony. But the story is not circular, it is linear. The harmony of the fourth crow is not the harmony of the first crow. The fourth crow does not say we need to return to a time like we existed pre-colonial and get back to that time. The fourth crow is a new time that took place after all these other things. And it's a time where we have to find a new harmony with our new neighbors and with all these people who had nothing to do with the second or third crows, and move together as a new community with everyone around us in a good way.
I appreciate you saying that, because a lot of times when we talk about history, people are like, oh, let's go back to in the name of time. That's it is linear.
Yeah, you never step in the same river
what's the
twice.
saying? You can't swim in the same river twice, kind of thing. Yeah, you can't. You never step in the same river twice. Yeah, it's always different. And so I do have to ask about, as a family historian, I go to local historical societies, and people will have preserved a story from usually the mid to late 1700s of early European settlers. It was usually Scots-Irish settlers that were on the quote-unquote frontier of Pennsylvania, up against what was Indian lands, and having encountered, it was a common practice, I suppose, that where they pushed people, right up against or into what was agreed to be tribal lands. And then they'd have these encounters that were quite violent. So, these are told from the Storykeeper in this instance is, a European, usually Scots-Irish, sometimes German, who will save these stories of scalpings, beheadings, like being chased down, murdered, and it's graphic. And you read this and you're like, well, I don't think it was just one-sided. I think there was violence equally applied to the other side. It wasn't just against the Europeans; it was violent. So this period of violence, what is your recommendation or suggestion for family historians as they encounter these stories? Like, what are we to do with these? Because I don't want to just take it and not include it, right? And and I don't know what the other side of the story is, right? So how do I contextualize it, or how do I do it justice? Or I'm not sure what
I think I understand the question you're asking, and if I do, it's a good one. And no, the violence was absolutely not one-sided. I mean, there were wars. We all know about this. We were forcibly removed, not asked politely, and had the door open for us, and we fought uh, to avoid that forced removal. But again, you can't blame that. At least you can't place the majority of that blame on the students or learners of today, because that's the story that has been told for so long. The story that has been told is incredibly romanticized, of course, in favor of the colonists. If people hear about us at all, many people do hear that, oh, they just picked up and left one day because it was getting too crowded here. And other just ridiculous. I'm referring, actually, what brought that to mind is a specific statue that exists in the Wissahickon Forest called Looking East. Um, and there's a little plaque there that actually says, this Lenape chief gazes, I'm sorry, it's called Looking West. This Lenape chief gazes westward as his people spread out to look for less crowded areas, or something like that. Um, Now, since I bring that up, I have to put right on the tails of that the Friends of the Wissahickon, the people who oversee and take care of that land, they have consulted with us and have since changed to that language because they realized it was problematic. But this is an example of the stories that are told. So no, our people. Now, the Lenape people, we were called the grandfather tribe by other tribes in the area, and we were respected as the original people here, and also as peacemakers, as arbiters. So when other tribes would have problems between them or among them, very often they would come to the Lenape to arbitrate that dispute and see everybody leave in a good way. And that is what we are primarily known for, are being peacemakers and arbiters. However, it is also well documented that when forced to the limit, when people finally were here and chasing us off our land and turning us in for bounties, that we could be fierce warriors in defending our territory. And our people fought, I mean, to the life and death. To resist being moved, to resist being forced out of our homeland when that was introduced to us, um, when we realized that the spirit of William Penn no longer lived on uh, in this place. So no, our people resisted very strongly, and for their homeland, for their families, for their lives, they fought. And there was a time where it was very clear that the colonists were our enemies. So we did try to resist that. We did fight, but of course, we were eventually overwhelmed by the military technology, the disease, and the engineered introduction of alcohol and other elements. So eventually, many of our people, like I said, many of our people were, despite their fighting, driven out, and those of us who remained, we had to go into hiding.
So the the present and the future of the Lenape, now that you're not so much in hiding, you are more comfortable talking in public and being out here, is there a possibility of Pennsylvania or the federal government providing, a tribal homeland for you in Pennsylvania, or is that not a discussion to be had? Or
So I mentioned before the only federally recognized nations of the Lenape people are our diaspora, our nations in Oklahoma, Wisconsin, and Ontario. Now, of our four homeland nations here in Pennsylvania, New Jersey, and Delaware, our three nations in New Jersey and Delaware, they have state recognition. So they've been recognized by their states. And that is important, but it doesn't carry nearly the weight of being recognized by the federal government. Pennsylvania is the only state in the Lenapehoking that has never recognized any of its indigenous people. There are no Pennsylvania recognized indigenous people. We are trying to change that.
Wow.
Yeah, that's a big wow. It's worth to just stop there.
That's a big wow. Like, because Pennsylvania has always prided itself on being, I think they still have it on the website, tolerance. And
Well, so much of that idea comes from, first of all, the early settlers, largely in my area, German settlers, who did tend to have very good relationships with us. And then a bit later, of course, William Penn, who is known for that spirit of friendship. And that spirit does live on here. Today, our nation has wonderful relationships with many Quaker meeting houses, organizations. We consider the Quakers good friends of ours, and we collaborate on opportunities. Um, but what that line skips over is that era of Penn's sons and the devastation that followed for hundreds of years between the first and the fourth crow. It basically skips over the second and third crows. Um, so yes, it is very surprising and it's very problematic. Um, we attempted to go for state recognition something like 20 years ago now, give or take. And we were making very good progress. And then there was an election in Pennsylvania, and the new governing people to come in, they, long story short, and of course this isn't documented, but this is how pretty much everyone feels who was involved in that effort before. Um, at the time, gambling was not yet legal in Pennsylvania. We had slot machines, but that was it. And a big hot button issue was, will we bring casinos and gambling in Pennsylvania? Now, our nation, the Lenape Nation of Pennsylvania, we have always been against bringing casinos into Pennsylvania, not for any ethical reason. Some of our diaspora nations have casinos. That's how they support their community, and that's vitally important. We don't say that casinos are a bad thing or gambling is a bad thing. But here in our homelands, we were concerned about the environmental impacts of not just the construction, but the tourism. It has always been central to the Lenape people to be good caretakers of the land here of all the Lenapehoking. So when there was this election, at the beginning, the politicians were in line with that view. They were trying to keep gambling out of Pennsylvania. After the election, that perception changed, and the new leaders of the movement wanted to bring gambling and casinos in. And I won't say because that would be telling this as a truth, as a documented truth, and it's not. But I will say there was an immediate correlation after this election that we just got booted to the bottom. We stopped getting emails back, the paperwork stopped, and everything just halted. Now, the one of the many ironies of this is that a state-recognized tribe nation still has absolutely no say about owning a reservation or building a casino. You have to be federally recognized to even enter that conversation. So it was a non-starter to begin with. But many of our people feel like just because we had been on record saying we don't want to see that here, the politicians disassociated with us.
well, I was going to say, luckily our memory's short, so you have a you have a chance of reinvigorating that conversation, I think. 20 years is enough time that nobody, a lot of those folks have moved on the government side, I hope.
We are trying right now. We decided sometime around the COVID times. Not that had anything to do with it, just that's kind of the benchmark in all of our brains for that era. We did decide, we reestablished a state recognition committee. I'm on that committee, and we are hoping that things will go differently this time.
That would be awesome. I don't know a better, I don't know how to describe it. That would be the time of the fourth crow. I mean, that would bring, we'd be bringing it back. It wouldn't be the same, but it would be, it's something that needs to happen. Let's put it that way. So what do you wish I had asked you, or what do you wish you could say to the audience of, genealogists and family historians, people that are studying their ancestors here, most of which not descendants of, they don't have the Native American heritage of any sort, they're just.
Wow, that's a big question. You asked a lot of wonderful questions. I think if there was one thing I'd say to all those people as a blanket, it's if you are interested at all in learning about our people and engaging with our people, reach out to us. Please get in contact. We are devoted to the time of the fourth crow to building good relationships, and if you are interested at all in learning about our people and engaging with our people, reach out to us. Please get in contact. We are devoted to the time of the fourth crow to building good relationships and re-educating the public about our people. Giving our neighbors the education and the knowledge that they were robbed of by colonialism. It's unfortunate. It's so unfortunate that you have to listen to a podcast or come to a university presentation to hear this information that you should have grown up with, just like all your other neighbors. But that is one of our strongest missions. So whether you're just interested personally about our people, if you want, we love giving educational programs to all ages, K through 12, university, and community environmental centers. For any reason, we advise on things like land acknowledgements, representation of the Lenape people through things like mascots or logos, and anything else. We're here and we're wanting to build those relationships. So get in touch.
Awesome. Good. I love it. I love it. Because I think some people are afraid and walking on eggshells, in terms of what to do. And it's nice. It's nice to know that there's friendship is possible. All right. Thank you so much, Adam, for being on the podcast. I really appreciate it. And I'm looking forward to seeing the comments on YouTube because it's a great place for people to get some interaction and questions. And if I see anything burning on there, just like on fire, I'm going to send you another email, see if we can get it taken care of. All right. Thank you.
Sounds great. Sure.
You can find the Lenape of Pennsylvania at lenapenation.org. Check out the links in the show notes to their online exhibits. And this is Denise Allen with Your Pennsylvania Ancestors. I'll catch you in the next episode.